West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Well, we have some breaking news from Uvalde right now. This is stunning, absolutely stunning news. Yesterday afternoon, on our special Memorial Day coverage, I was anchoring from 6 to 8 p.m., and we reported to you then that Peter Arredondo, who was the commanding officer in the school for those 78 minutes when the police were doing nothing. He is the chief of police of the school district of Uvalde, that very small 5-person police force that he commands. He was also 3 weeks ago elected to the city council in Uvalde. He won an election 3 weeks ago to the city council in Uvalde. He was scheduled to be sworn in as a member of the city council today at a city council meeting in Uvalde. And yesterday we reported to you that that meeting of the city council for today was canceled. That was the end of the story for today, as far as we knew. And now, tonight, the city council, the mayor of Uvalde, the Republican mayor of Uvalde, has just issued a statement indicating that no, they didn't have the city council meeting, but the police chief was sworn in as a member of the city council today, and that happened while he's been hiding out from investigators who are trying to get more information from this police chief who has been AWOL for 2 days. But he did get sworn in tonight as a member of the Uvalde City Council. And here is the written statement produced by the Republican mayor of Uvalde tonight. This is from Mayor Don McLaughlin. You'll remember him as the man who angrily called Beto O'Rourke a sick son of a bitch when Beto O'Rourke questioned him and Governor Abbott at their completely false, we now know, completely false press conference that they held the day after the mass murder of those 19 children and 2 teachers in Uvalde. Here is that mayor's written statement tonight. Uvalde City Council members were sworn in today as per the city charter, out of respect for the families who buried their children today and who are planning to bury their children in the next few days. No ceremony was held. Our parents deserve answers, and I trust the Texas Department of Public Safety, Texas Rangers, will leave no stone unturned. One answer that the parents deserve is, where is Peter Arredondo? Where is he? Why is he not cooperating with the investigation of what he did in that school where those children were killed? The Republican mayor of Uvalde knew where Arredondo was at some point today and didn't help the authorities get in contact with him so that he could answer their questions that he's refusing to answer. It is a stunning, shocking performance by all layers of government in Texas, all layers, from the city of Uvalde to the State House to the governor. And tonight, exactly 1 week after the disastrously bad police work at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, where 19 children were shot to death and bled to death on the floor of their classroom, along with 2 of their teachers, no one involved in that disastrously bad police work has been fired. No one. No one has resigned. No one. And the police chief in charge in the school that day has gone AWOL, except to get himself sworn in today, secretly sworn in, secretly, as a member of the city council. They did it as a secret and made it public after they did it. Our leadoff guest tonight, Tony Plahetsky, an investigative reporter with the Austin American-Statesman, will join us in a moment, is now reporting the chief of the Uvalde School District Police Department, Peter Arredondo, has not responded to the Texas Rangers in 2 days for a follow-up interview from his initial statement immediately after the mass shooting. No one has been fired and no one has resigned for making false public statements or for supporting false public statements and relaying false public statements by Texas authorities after that mass murder. Governor Greg Abbott made this false statement in his first visit to Uvalde the day after the mass murder of those children and teachers.
But the reality is, as horrible as what happened, it could have been worse. The reason it was not worse is because law enforcement officials did what they do.
That was a lie. And Governor Abbott now says that he was lied to by those law enforcement officials, and he is livid, that was his word, livid about being lied to, but not livid enough to fire whoever lied to him. And in situations like this, governors usually get their information from the highest ranking law enforcement official employed by the governor, and that is Stephen McCraw, the head of the Texas State Police, historically known as the Texas Rangers. Abbott did not appoint him, he inherited him, but Abbott has the power to fire him at any moment. He has the power to fire Steve McCraw immediately. Steve McCraw could have the decency to resign after failing the people of Texas by helping to pass along false information about the mass murder. In a moment, we will be joined by another Texas reporter who obtained information today indicating that Steve McCraw's attempt to blame a teacher for leaving a school door open is not true.
The exterior door suspected of where we knew the shooter entered, Ramos, was propped open by a teacher. 11:28, the suspect vehicle crashes into the ditch, as previously described. The teacher runs to the room 132 to retrieve a phone, and that same teacher walks back to the exit door, and door remains propped open.
Our other leadoff guest tonight, reporter Guillermo Contreras of the San Antonio Express News, is reporting that Don Flannery, an attorney representing that teacher, who remains unnamed, says that the teacher closed that door after she re-entered the school and immediately called 911 as soon as she heard shooting. Her lawyer said she remembers pulling the door closed while telling 911 that he was shooting. She thought the door would lock because that door is always supposed to be locked. Flannery added that the teacher even remembers pulling and holding onto the door, which has a horizontal push bar, while on the phone with 911. A law enforcement source familiar with the investigation said surveillance video and audio verifies that the teacher removed the rock, keeping the door open, then closed it. She slammed it shut, said the source, who requested anonymity because the source does not have authority to speak with the media. The source said investigators are trying to determine if the door was unlocked earlier or if its lock was not working because the gunman used the same door to get into the school. A new recording obtained by ABC News appears to show 911 dispatchers alerting police on the scene that the dispatchers were getting phone calls from children inside the school.
We do have a child online, row 12. Are we able to, is there anybody inside of the building? Child is advising he is in the room full of victims at this moment.
As the evidence in this case shows us once again, police training does not work. Police training does not work, especially when police officers feel threatened in any way, including just if their authority is threatened. Police officers feel threatened with death, when they did for 78 minutes in that school in Uvalde. That's when their training does not work. And even when police officers feel that their authority is being threatened or questioned, their training does not work, as in the murder of George Floyd. If police training worked, George Floyd would be alive today. If police training worked, we don't know how many of those 19 children at Robb Elementary School would be alive today. If police training worked, we don't know if one or both of those teachers at Robb Elementary School who bled to death on the floor would be alive today. Police training does not work. And when police officers fail because they violate their training, their reflex universally is to cover up their mistakes. And that's what we have seen since the first day of the police response to the mass murder in Uvalde. That's what we saw on the second day. And only because reporters and the families in Uvalde kept pressing for the truth have we begun to discover the holes in the police story. There are surely more to come. The police were never, ever going to reveal their mistakes. Never. They never do. Peter Arredondo hiding out and refusing to cooperate with the investigation is actually not unusual in police work. Police officers who know they've made mistakes always refuse to cooperate in investigations, and they lawyer up as quickly as they can. Always. That's what they do. And governors like Greg Abbott do nothing about it. No one gets fired. No one is forced to resign. The mayor of Uvalde, that mayor who you remember called Beto O'Rourke a sick son of a bitch right there, just for questioning Greg Abbott about this the day after the mass murder. That mayor has done absolutely nothing to reveal the truth of what happened in his city. And today, he did nothing to reveal the truth about where that police chief has been hiding out, who he helped swear in as a city councilor today. That's what the Republican mayor of Uvalde did. Can you imagine a real mayor anywhere in America? Any Democratic mayor in America, the mayor of New York, the mayor of Boston, the mayor of Houston, the mayor of Dallas, any mayor anywhere in a real city being silent for a week about the facts and the truth of what happened in a mass murder in a school, an elementary school in his city? That's what that mayor is doing in Uvalde. No one has been fired, and no one has had the decency to resign after failing to protect the lives of children and teachers in an elementary school.
It is Wednesday, the 1st of June of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. You know, will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests? Because a lot of them are bishops from Opus Dei. And I gotta tell you, they're not nice. No, not at all. Every one of them wants to be an inquisitor. Yeah. Which makes me wonder if they're really asking to be spanked themselves, because we know how these creeps work. It's all projection with them, and you know it. And it seems to be peculiar to a certain right wing of the political spectrum. Isn't that weird? Okay. So, the superheroes who keep telling us that they're superheroes are now saying, oh, you can't expect us to be superheroes. I mean, that's TV. Really? Like we've been saying all along, and you should be held accountable like the rest of us? Well, I guess when push comes to shove, they show their true colors, and their true colors are that they're basically a gang. There is a thin blue line between the police and accountability, apparently. And one thing I think that we probably learned from all of those court dramas and all those police shows and Law and Order, I mean, decades of Law and Order. Whenever a cop is caught doing something wrong or being a coward, they're never going to cooperate with internal affairs. Jeez, no wonder this police chief in Uvalde is AWOL. And that cracker mayor, yeah, I kept thinking it was Dan Patrick who called Beto a sick son of a bitch. And that guy knew exactly what had happened the whole time. The whole time. And what does he do? He stands up like Boss Hogg, telling Beto you're a sick son of a bitch, when the sick son of a bitches were at that panel, and Boss Hogg standing up with a gut bigger than mine now. Way bigger. Anyway, pointing down on Beto and calling him the sick son of a bitch. We know what's been going on. Looks to me like the city council and the police run Uvalde like Ferguson had been run, and probably still is being run. Curious how many wayward travelers are getting tickets for, I don't know, broken headlights. Let's ransack the person's car and look for drugs and illegals. I want to know what's been going on there. We've already heard testimonies on the day from parents who say, we don't really expect these cops to do anything. We call them all the time, and they're pretty slow. They're slow to respond. So you have 19 cops out in a hallway cowering. They're not going to put their lives on the line. They're not going to stack up in a suicide mission to protect a bunch of little Mexican girls. They knew exactly what was going on. They knew there were little kids in those classrooms, little girls, because that's primarily what the kid was killing. The killer was who the killer was killing. Little girls. The cops knew it. The 911 dispatcher relayed that message in the exact room, and they still didn't do anything. It took Border Patrol to say, F it, we're going in. The Uvalde cops had no incentive to save those that they've been terrorizing all along. They're really good at the no-knock warrants, but when it comes to a terrorist shooting up a school of little girls, we can't do anything because we're afraid we might be killed. Now you're afraid. Oh, actually, they're always afraid. That is their go-to legal defense. That 12-year-old walking away from me with iPod earbuds in his ears, carrying an airsoft rifle, walking away from me in Santa Rosa. I feared for my life, so I had to shoot him in the back. No one remembers that killing of the Lopez kid. And what was that guy's legal defense? He feared for his life. He thought the airsoft rifle was real, and he yelled at the kid, and the kid didn't turn around because the kid had earbuds in his ears, listening to music, walking to a friend's house to take back the airsoft rifle that he had borrowed. Now, the kid was, like I said, an Hispanic kid, so I think that's probably why the cop feared so much for his life. But this is a legal defense. They even tried it with George Floyd. Oh, I was afraid he was going to hulk up. That's when we heard the idea of hulking up with Michael Brown. He was shot in the back, but hey, he might have hulked up. Yeah, so they had to choke George Floyd off because he was already big. Can you imagine if he had hulked up, how bad it would have been for the cops? They feared for their lives. Accountability. A thin blue line. They show their true colors. And their colors show that they're just a gang. The codes of loyalty, the expectations of that loyalty, and all the behavior that comes about because of that loyalty. But it isn't loyalty to the Constitution of the United States. Nope. It is not that. And for that, they should not be cops, should they? All right. I think they need a little bit more than, the 50 to 175 hours that are expected for them to get through the academy. Oh, boy. Hey, that was a long clip by Lawrence, but I had to get it in. So let's go through what we have on the rest of the menu here stories that we've curated for your, intellectual culinary enjoyment. Food for thought. TEDx Portland may have run afoul of IRS rules by hosting Oregon's independent gubernatorial hopeful, who is one of the state's 6,740 machine gun owners. My God, we almost have 7,000 legal machine gun owners in this state, and I don't think they're liberals. Even though this lady happened to be a Democrat, she was the only Democrat that got an A rating by the NRA in Oregon. Inspectors General need more authority to go after fraud in the COVID-19 relief programs. And a former executive of a California solar power company was sentenced to 8 years in prison for his role in a $1 billion fraud scheme. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a 32-year-old French reporter became the 8th journalist killed while covering the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And the new Australian government includes a record 13 women ministers. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link. The chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And do please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, because we really do need the help. And if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, that really does help us pay our bills. And then that allows us to fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance that has been resisting the dark forces of evil for over 11 years now. And thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms, hopefully before the opening clip has finished. And we like to do it before the show begins, but, it's hard. As you know. Anyway, do follow me at Justice Putnam for those show notes and links, because that's where the real reportage is, all right? Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. And pick up the deep archive of the Netroots Radio Library at the Internet Archive at archive.org. All right. I like saying that, org. It's like short for Oregon. And that's where we're going right now, because this first offering is out of the Oregonian by, where are we? Hillary Barode. Oregon gun owners number in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps more. No one tracks overall firearm ownership in the state, but the federal government does track the subset of Oregonians who own machine guns. And in 2021, they numbered 6,740. Among their ranks, former longtime Democratic lawmaker Betsy Johnson, now running as an unaffiliated candidate for governor because apparently people in the rural white nationalist part of Oregon think that anybody Democratic is a baby eater. I wonder how they came to that understanding. Anyway, Johnson's steadfast opposition to gun safety regulations is well known, as is her status as a gun owner and collector. They always say that I'm just collecting the guns. Oh, really? Yeah, it looks like you're amassing, but they call themselves collectors. Well, less well known is the fact that Johnson owns a Cold War era submachine gun. Johnson, who represented a Northwest Oregon Senate district until she resigned to run for governor last year, discussed her machine gun ownership with a journalism class at Jewell School nearly a decade ago, as part of her response to a student question about her opinion on gun control, weeks after a gunman killed 20 elementary school students and 5 adults at Sandy Hook. In Salem, lawmakers were gearing up to try to pass additional gun restrictions, including a ban on military-style rifles. "You've asked the question of this legislative session," Johnson responded to a middle school student who posed the question, and that was according to the January 2013 article in the Daily Astorian. Now, I should note also, any of the terrible accents and dialects that I might ascribe to these characters, like Betsy Johnson, is wholly my responsibility. Okay? Okay.
Let me answer it in a kind of odd way. I'm the only member of my caucus that belongs to the NRA. I'm a Class 3 holder, which means that I can legally possess a machine gun and actually have one. So I take the Second Amendment pretty seriously.
Now, understand, this is a junior high school kid she's saying this to, right after Sandy Hook. Well, according to the newspaper, Johnson's answer left several students with their mouths wide open. Well, as a parent and grandparent, my mouth would be forming words like, "What the F?" Johnson did not respond to a phone call, but a spokesperson for her campaign, Jennifer Sitton, wrote in an email that Betsy and her husband have collected unique and vintage guns for many years, and the submachine gun was last fired over 25 years ago and is stored securely in a safe. Johnson's staunch opposition to gun regulations in the legislature and recently on the campaign trail has prompted increased criticism in the last week following the mass shootings in Buffalo, New York, and Uvalde, Texas. In a potential departure from Johnson's historical stance, Sitton said on Tuesday that Johnson would support and enforce stronger background checks for gun purchases and raising the age to purchase certain firearms from 18 to 21 if she is elected governor. Now, some Oregons might not realize that civilians can still own the fully automatic weapons since Congress outlawed the sale of new machine guns to civilians in 1986. However, Americans can still obtain the fully automatic guns if they obtain a federal license. Fully automatic machine guns will continue to fire ammunition as long as the trigger is held down and ammunition is available. Whereas unmodified semi-automatic weapons can fire repeatedly, but the trigger must be pulled each time. And I had gun bots come on to my timeline to tell me that a semi-automatic weapon's not really a weapon of war. All right. Now, collectors spend large sums on machine guns, which can run in the tens of thousands of dollars, and the ammunition to feed into them. In January of 2013, Johnson also gave students her take on the Sandy Hook shooting. The killer's mother was a gun enthusiast, and he used weapons from her collection to kill his mother and then massacre young students and staff at the elementary school. To somehow take a situation like Newton, where a very troubled adolescent young man stole guns that were legally purchased and went in and slaughtered those children, is a horrific situation. Johnson told those little junior high school kids right after a bunch of kids had been slaughtered. But the policy question is, do we ban guns because a deranged young man stole guns and did a horrifying thing? That is going to be where the debate is. Now, Johnson warned the student who asked her about gun control, who said his mother owned a rifle for hunting, that some of my colleagues would have the government come into her house and take away her guns. They hate guns that much. No, I think what we do hate is like just giving anybody a submachine gun without a federal license. Jennifer McDermott of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Inspectors General need more authority to go after fraud in the COVID-19 relief programs, the independent committee overseeing federal pandemic relief spending said yesterday, Tuesday. The agency's watchdog's authority to administratively prosecute fraudsters is limited to fraud of $150,000 or less from COVID-19 relief programs, and the Department of Justice is too busy for cases under $1 million, a gap that must be closed, the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee said. So if you frauded the government of monies between $150,000 and $1 million, you're flying under the radar, and that ain't resisting the dark evil forces. I got to tell you, that's being part of the dark evil forces. Michael Horowitz, head of the committee and the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, said the $150,000 threshold is far too low, given the scope of the fraud and programs set up to help businesses and people who lost their jobs due to the pandemic. He is asking Congress to modify provisions in the law on fraud committed against the federal government to raise the maximum amount of a fraud claim that may be handled administratively to $1 million. Associated Press staff bring us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. A former executive of a California solar power company was sentenced to 8 years in prison and ordered to pay nearly $620 million in restitution for his role in a $1 billion fraud scheme. Alan Hansen of Vacaville pleaded guilty in 2020 to conspiracy and money laundering charges. Hansen, age 51, worked for DC Solar, a company based in Benicia in the San Francisco Bay Area that marketed mobile solar generator units. The firm touted the units mounted on trailers as being able to provide emergency power for cell phone companies or to provide lighting at sporting and other events. But the company executives started telling investors they could benefit from federal tax credits by buying the generators and leasing them back to DC Solar, which would then provide them to other companies for their use. The generators never provided much income, and prosecutors say the company ran a Ponzi scheme in which early investors were paid with funds from later investors. The company eventually stopped building the mobile generators altogether, and prosecutors say at least half the company's claimed 17,000 generators did not exist. Hansen had previously worked for a telecom company that did business with DC Solar. In that role, he accepted $1 million from co-conspirators at DC Solar to fraudulently sign a false leasing contract for the generators. Then, Hansen joined DC Solar, where he signed false agreements relating to the earlier contract, according to court documents. DC Solar founder Jeff Karpoff was sentenced last November to 30 years in prison and ordered to pay $790.6 million in restitution for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. The company's CFO, Robert Carmen, was sentenced in April to 6 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $624 million in restitution. Other defendants have pleaded guilty to criminal offenses related to the fraud scheme and are scheduled for sentencing, prosecutors said. Let's now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Horror Me Too. Examining humankind's increasingly tenuous place in the natural order is becoming a hallmark of director Alex Garland. Now his new Men joins the enigmatic Ex Machina and Annihilation in his explorations, this time with a creative look at what's come to be called toxic masculinity. To tell the story, there are just two main actors. One is the talented Jessie Buckley, who plays Harper Marlowe, an urban professional woman seeking the solace of the English countryside after the apparent suicide of her husband, the backstory on which we get in flashback. The male actor is an underappreciated Rory Kinnear, who plays the landlord of her rental cottage, the constable, the vicar, and a mysterious naked stalker. In other words, the men, except for the dead husband, who figures prominently in the conclusion. All these characters are made up just enough for it to take merely a moment to discover that they're all the same guy. The male toxicity almost oozes. The landlord is creepy, passive-aggressive, and not subtle. The constable a step above indifferent. And then there's the vicar, whose initial comforting sympathies quickly give way to a demeanor slyly encapsulating religion's age-old problems with women. And not just Christianity's. Inside the vicar's church are symbols, Christian and pagan, male and female, including the ancient fertility symbol Sheila Nagig. The body horror conclusion portrays a profoundly female act, from whence the men emerge in an order which leaves a seed of doubt. As intellectual as it is visceral, Men may have a hard time connecting at the box office, but what its message lacks in profundity at this point in time is more than made up for by its provocative approach. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. It's probably happened to you. You look at a parking meter or a pickle slice or the foam in your cup of cappuccino, and you think, hey, that looks like a face. It's a phenomenon called pareidolia, and it's something we humans tend to do. Now, a new study suggests we also do something else. We tend to see those illusory faces as having a gender. And most often, we think they're male. The findings appear in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Growing up, my sister Jenny and I had our own word for examples of face pareidolia, bees-ups.
Susan Wardle, a cognitive neuroscientist at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda. Her term is total nonsense, but Wardle must have felt some connection with bees-ups. As a grown-up, she set out to study them after a conversation she had with her colleague Jessica Taubert.
We were talking about face neurons in the brain, which respond preferentially to images of faces, but they also sometimes respond to pictures of round objects, such as apples or clocks. That reminded us of the experience of seeing faces in objects, and we thought it would be fun to find out whether the face regions of the brain respond to illusory faces in a similar way to real faces.
Indeed, in an earlier study, they found that the same brain regions activated by actual human faces were also triggered by faux faces in inanimate objects, like potatoes or teapots or washing machines. But that made them wonder, what do we see in these illusory faces?
For example, do these faces appear to be of a particular age or gender, and do they have a specific emotional expression?
So they set out to collect a cornucopia of images.
We started by finding examples of face pareidolia on the internet, but now people send us their own examples, and we also take photos of illusory faces that we see out in the world.
They showed 250 of these photos to some 3,800 volunteers.
And we found that people readily attribute these features to illusory faces. For example, a given illusory face might look like a fearful young boy or a grumpy older woman.
But most striking of all,
there is a strong bias for people to perceive illusory faces as male rather than female.
About 4 times as often, the researchers found.
And this was the case for both female and male participants.
So it wasn't just that men saw Mr. Potato Head everywhere they looked. It also wasn't tied to the type of object in question, like a hammer versus a handbag.
And the male bias persists when the faces are shown in black and white, so it's not due to gender associations with color either.
Obviously, none of these fake faces has a biological sex.
Which means there is no reason for us to perceive them to have a particular gender. The fact that we do shows that the illusory faces also engage our social perception system.
And the reason we default to seeing males is that our brains need more information before we see a face as female. Think of a smiley face emoji.
Most people would probably say that it looks more male than female. The addition of other details such as eyelashes and hair is used to make emojis look more female. The same is true of Lego characters.
The fact that we're so quick to see faces in couch cushions and tree trunks and slices of bread, gender assignments aside, is maybe not all that surprising. The same thing happens to monkeys, creatures who are also hardwired for making social connections.
And it suggests that we see illusory faces because, like other social primates, our brains are so tuned into faces. We don't want to miss a single face in the environment, even if that means occasionally making a mistake.
Seems the potential benefit of gaining a friend is worth more than the potential cost of losing face. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
last July, several GOP senators combined their 5-watt intellects to charge that inflation was rising because of, quote, insane tax and spending spree of President Biden and the Democrats. Never mind that the insane spending is for such sensible, productive, and enormously popular national needs as child care and jobless benefits. Mitch McConnell's rabidly partisan flock saw the chance to politicize the public's legitimate worries about rising prices. You poor consumers are made to pay more for basics, they squawked, because of Socialist Joe's investment in grassroots people. Follow the ricocheting pinball of the GOP's logic. 1, they say that helping hard-hit families induces them to refuse to go to work. 2, this creates blockages in the global supply chain. 3, this causes shortages of everything. 4, this forces corporate bosses to raise all prices, which 5, slams the middle class and poor, so 6, lazy workers cause inflation. Whoa! Rube Goldberg couldn't have dreamed up a more fantastical diagram to deflect attention from what's really happening, namely that instead of an inflation problem, we have a corporate greed problem. Of course, the greedmeisters insist that their pursuit of excess corporate profits has not driven any price surges. In our economy of free market competition, they snap, prices are established by the law of supply and demand. It's the magic of the marketplace, they explain. But magicians don't do magic, they perform illusions. And the illusion of free market competition implodes when it hits the reality that our economy doesn't remotely resemble a competitive marketplace. This is Jim Hightower saying, for some 40 years, corporate-directed government policies have been transforming America into a monopoly nation, letting the few gouge the many. That's where inflation comes from. Howdy-ho, folks. Thanks for tuning in and sharing my weekly commentaries. Also, please join me for a live web show I host every other Tuesday, the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour at the Chat and Chew Cafe. You can join the action live online as I chat with grassroots leaders and progressive sparklies from around the country. Go to hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew to find out about upcoming guests and watch past episodes. That's hightowerlowdown.org/chat-and-chew.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Before he reached the age of 16, George Washington wrote down 110 rules of civility and decent behavior in company and conversation. Scholars believed he copied these rules as a writing exercise, and many writers have cited the rules of civility as helping to form Washington's character at an early age. The rules have their origin in a French Jesuit text from 1595. An English adaptation of the text had been used in England for many years. This made it to Virginia, where it was adapted and simplified, and finally used as a writing exercise by the young Washington. The original is at the Library of Congress. You can find the entire text online, but here are some excerpts. First, every action done in company ought to be with some sign of respect to those who are present. Sixth, sleep not when others speak. Sit not when others stand. Speak not when you should hold your peace. Walk not on when others stop. 19th, let your countenance be pleasant, but in serious matters somewhat grave. 22nd, shew not yourself glad at the misfortune of another, though he were your enemy. 54th, play not the peacock, looking everywhere about you to see if you be well decked, if your shoes fit well, if your stockings sit neatly, and clothes handsomely. 56th, associate yourself with men of good quality if you esteem your own reputation, for 'tis better to be alone than in bad company. 73rd, think before you speak, pronounce not imperfectly, nor bring out your words too hastily, but orderly and distinctly. 82nd, undertake not what you cannot perform, but be careful to keep your promise. 89th, speak not evil of the absent, for it is unjust. 91st, make no show of taking great delight in your victuals. Feed not with greediness. Cut your bread with a knife. Lean not on the table, neither find fault with what you eat. 109th, let your recreations be manful, not sinful. 110th, labor to keep alive in your breast that little spark of celestial fire called conscience. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Would you be willing to risk your job to stand up for the rights that you believe in? For postal worker Henry Gerber, the answer to that question was a resounding yes. And so, on this day in labor history, the year was 2001. That was the day that Gerber's home was designated a Chicago landmark in recognition of his early leadership in the fight for homosexual rights. Henry was born in Bavaria, Germany in 1892. He immigrated to the United States in 1913, making his home in Chicago. He served in the United States Army in Germany for 3 years during World War I. While in Germany, he was impressed with the push for homosexual rights taking place in the country after the war. Returning to Chicago, Henry returned to work as a postal worker. He also founded the Society for Human Rights. It is considered the very first formal homosexual rights organization in the United States. The organization distributed a publication titled Friendship and Freedom. Yet, due to repression, only 2 issues were ever produced. The publication's outspoken stance on homosexual rights led the police to arrest Henry and the other founders of the society. Police confiscated his papers as evidence. The men stayed in jail for 3 days. Gerber would face 3 separate trials related to his work for homosexual rights. Although he was never convicted, his defense drained his finances. Then he lost his job for alleged conduct unbecoming a postal worker. The society was effectively crushed. Gerber rejoined the United States Army, working as an editor and proofreader for Army publications for nearly 2 decades. It was not until 1998 that President Bill Clinton signed Executive Order 13087. That order extended protection from discrimination based on sexual orientation to U.S. Postal Service workers. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 58 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting temperatures a tad warmer than yesterday, about the mid-80s or a tad above that. There's a lot of tads here, and looks like we will have considerable cloudiness with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and considerable cloudiness overnight with lows in the mid to upper 50s, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10, and then considerable clouds early tomorrow with some decrease in clouds later in the day, with highs in the low 80s, winds out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and it looks like we will be getting some rain beginning Friday afternoon through the weekend, bringing with it about 3/4 of an inch, and I got to tell you, I don't mind that. That sounds like a good thing. Grass pollen is rated very high right outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 23 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is very high at 8. Do take care. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.01 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 84%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 63 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 74 and sunny. Rome is 84 and fair. Kyiv is 81 and fair. Kabul is 66 and fair. Hong Kong is 82 and fair. Tokyo is 70 degrees and fair. Oh, good. Sydney, Australia is different. They're 51 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is equally different because they are 51 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York will always be different at 65 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Meryl Cornfield and Tara Baramapour of the Washington Post brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A French photojournalist covering evacuation efforts in eastern Ukraine was killed during a Russian strike that hit the humanitarian truck he was in. Frederick Leclerc Imhoff, who was carrying press credentials, was fatally wounded after shrapnel pierced the armored evacuation truck that was about to pick up refugees near a focal point of the ongoing battle. The shrapnel struck his neck. Leclerc Imhoff, the 8th journalist killed while covering the Russian invasion of Ukraine, was remembered by his colleagues at French news outlet BFM TV for his enthusiasm, care, and courage. He was 32. After the attack, evacuations were called off for the area, one of the last industrial hubs under Ukrainian control in the eastern province. The truck was about to pick up 10 civilians when it was struck and Leclerc Imhoff was killed. A police officer in the truck was saved by his helmet. The bloody truck was marked humanitarian aid, inches from where the projectile appeared to have punctured the thick glass.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Associated Press staff bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Australia's new government was sworn in today. That includes a record 13 women, including the first female Muslim to serve in the role and the second Indigenous person named Indigenous Affairs Minister. The ceremony, conducted by Governor General David Hurley in the capital, Canberra, came 11 days after new Prime Minister Anthony Albanese led the centre-left Labour Party to an election victory over the incumbent Conservatives. Proud to lead an inclusive government that is as diverse as Australia itself, Albanese, or is it Albanese, wrote on Twitter. Welcome to all these new Labour members. Youth Minister Anne Ally is Australia's first female Muslim minister, while Industry and Science Minister Ed Husic is the first Muslim to serve in cabinet. Linda Burney became the first woman and only the second Indigenous person to serve as Indigenous Affairs Minister. Albanese and Foreign Minister Penny Wong were sworn in early last week so they could fly to Tokyo for a summit with Joe Biden, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.